All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for staying late and coming to our presentation here. I know it's the last one of the conference, so we'll walk you through what we've done at CARFAX. So we're going to give you a little overview of what we did to eliminate technical debt at CARFAX using Gradleware, as well as using a differentiated Agile approach, kind of hopped up on steroids, so to speak. So I'm Jim Noel. I'm the Director of Product Development at CARFAX. And this is the development team. There's Paul, Jacob, Sam, Jason. And these were the guys that actually made it all happen. These were the heroes of the deal, and they're the ones that drove it. But I'm going to give you kind of a little overview of what we did to get our technical debt project off the ground, and we called it Codefest. So. A little brief history here of CARFAX. We're the leading provider of vehicle history reports in the country. We also have an office in Europe and Germany, based out of Germany. We've been doing Agile since 2004. We started with XP and have grown into an Agile shop. We're several self-directed and organized teams around different aspects of our business. So our teams, it's really about teamwork, being Agile and XP, and then how do we get better at everything we do, whether it be teamwork or whether it be, in this instance, our code base and how we do our builds. So real quick question here. Any directors, managers, C-level people in the room? Oh, great, 3, all right. And the rest, I'm assuming, are developers? Okay, that's good to know because we're going to do this in kind of 2 parts, and it really takes both groups of people to pull off something like this, at least in the CARFAX environment and culture. So we're going to give you an overview of what the lead-in is from the managers and the leaders type of what you guys will need to do, and developers pay attention to that because they're your best friends. I know normally that's not the case, but these guys are your best friends when you're getting ready to do a Codefest or some kind of a technical debt drawdown. And then for the managers types, pay attention to what the developers did, because if you give them the opportunity and leave them to it with a little direction and a lot of latitude, you're going to have a great success. So the overview, it does take 4 great pieces to this. It takes great people. You've got to gather the intelligence around it, and then there's the execution, and then you have to have a great tool as part of that execution. And at the end, we'll have a little discussion about what we did and answer any of your questions. And by the way, if you have questions, please ask throughout the presentation. So historically at CARFAX, to remove technical debt, it really wasn't a planned event in most cases. It was usually a grassroots initiative where we saw maybe a problem and we tried to organize around it or swarm around it. Usually we didn't communicate that very well to the business, so they were wondering, why aren't people working on my projects? But I hear they're working on something else. So that was a challenge for us. And then mostly, and really kind of sadly in a lot of cases, and I've seen this in other places as well, it's driven by a crisis event. Maybe something broke or it doesn't work and you've got to get it fixed immediately to get your product out the door or to solve your problems. So you swarm around it, and usually you don't even solve the problem. It's just a symptom solution, and then off you go, and you still have that problem kind of as an anchor there ready to explode later on. So what we did is we kind of came up with this idea called Codefest. And there's really 4 really big pieces to how we did the Codefest. So there was the concept, how we came up with that, the play, actually how we designed it and created the play, what we wanted to do. Then there was a little heartbreak in there, we'll tell you about that. And then finally there was the revival, where it all came back together and we executed and came out with a really good result with that. So the Codefest concept. So we have a team, a technical team, that really looks at things of how we want to be better technically within our department. And they came up with this idea, and I'm not sure if it was you, Paul, it may have been, I can't remember, but somebody came up with this idea, hey, why don't we have a hackathon and just pick something and just take some time out go have a lot of fun at it, and we'll come out with this great result. Well, it sounded like a good idea, but the word hackathon really kind of elicits sometimes some negative feelings from other people, like, oh, you're just going to go hack some stuff up. So we came up with this idea of Codefest. So then as we were looking at Codefest and trying to figure out what that really meant, we were trying to figure out how can we get the support of it and how much support we can get. Well, we run in 1 week to 2 week iterations. So we thought, well, we'll look at doing a 2-week iteration on a Codefest. So that's where we landed at the length of this fest, of where we'd all get together and work on it. And then we needed to come up with, now what is the idea? So the idea was we get everybody on the department to submit ideas, whatever they thought would be a great idea to work on, things that would be cool perhaps, things that would eliminate our technical debt. And we had some really great ideas, and it was tough to choose. But as part of that, that's where I kind of had to step in and say, this is our first Codefest, so what we really wanted to do is find something that we could work on that would also improve our lives as developers, improve my life saying, hey, these guys aren't always saying they've got a problem, as well as return some investment back to our product owners and our customers, so they would say, hey, you guys went and spent this time and we're seeing the benefit from it as well. So once we laid those parameters out, and then we decided, okay, let's vote on it, because once you get something that's picked by the teams that are going to do it, that they're kind of passionate about, then they're going to do a lot better job. They're going to be more focused on it and have a lot more fun with it. So we did that, and I had to guide them, and this is from the leadership team, but for the developers in the room as well, you know, sometimes you got to listen, sometimes you got to lead. And so we picked an item that they're going to tell you about here in a minute that really wasn't their #1 pick overall, and really wasn't something that they would have considered the funnest or the coolest thing to work on. But as you'll see through this, and we went through it, it really provided us a good foundation with a great return on investment for our customers that we're going to need to support us in that. So then we had to justify the project. So we kind of picked a project. Now we've got to justify it so we can get the support. And part of that, there's kind of 3 big pieces to that we found. One, we had to identify the problem, which we had done, but now we had to go in and say, now what is this problem, and couch it in terms of our customers, i.e. to our audience, let them know so they could understand why we really wanted to do this. Then we needed to look at the metrics. So CARFAX is really driven by metrics in just about everything we do. So it's really a metric-driven company. So we knew that if we had the right metrics, that would go a long way to supporting, getting the support for our Codefest. And then part of those metrics then at the end, you want to be able to show the ROI. So if we do this project, what's in it for them, so to speak? What are your product owners, your supporters, all the people that are going to say, hey, it's okay to take time out from their projects to go solve this, so they can see the benefit to them as well. So we did that, and then they bought it. So we sold this a great idea, we got the support for it, and they were in. So they gave us the time to do it. We picked a couple of weeks that we wanted to do it in, started getting the schedule for that, and actually made the plans and got set up, and actually got some excitement going on the teams. The developers were really excited, and they were hopping up and down saying, yeah, we're going to get to do this. Then we had a little heartbreak. As all things happen in your business, and especially in CARFAX, because we're market driven, we have changing priorities quite a bit. And it just so happened, just as we were running into getting Codefest really launched and getting it going, we found out that there was this big priority change, and it was jeopardizing Codefest, because wow, if we change our priorities, we need to organize the teams a certain way, and we really can't give up 2 weeks at this time. So at that point, we already had things in motion. We knew the ROI, they knew the ROI, it's just they didn't have the courage, or they were feeling the pressure to do something else. So when you're dealing with an erosion of support at that point, this is again for the leaders and the managers of a Codefest, or your champions, is sometimes you've got to really step up and support your team and be their shield, and really kind of put your foot down sometimes if need be. You got to do it in the right way. Sometimes you've got to get a little passionate about it, of which I did. And so once everybody saw how passionate I was about it, because I knew how passionate they were about it, then they got the reality, oh, this is really something that's important, and they decided to go ahead and say, okay, we'll support it, we'll give you the 2 weeks like we said, the same 2 weeks we did, which is great because we'd already had plane tickets purchased for people to come in, and it would have been a big mess had we not. Now that was part of it, but as part of us doing the Codefest, with everything you do, there's a collaboration that you need to have with your product owners and the rest of the business. And so part of that with these priorities, this group of original people that were around Codefest, we needed some of them and their expertise on these high profile projects that deemed very high priority for us. So with that, since we're a self-organized team and we're pretty open and honest within our group, and I try to give as much latitude and decision making to the development teams as possible, we all got together and said, okay, here's where we're at. You know, we've got these 2 weeks, but these people that are on the Codefest, some of them aren't going to be able to do it because they need to be on these projects. So what do you guys think? And so they came up with a solution. We went back to the business. They said, okay. And they helped us with even a couple of other better ideas that they supported, even giving one whole team, project team, saying, we'll give you the whole team for 2 weeks, which was about a half of the entire Codefest team. So when you collaborate, you have that ROI, and you really partner, you really come out with a pretty good result. So we did the team shuffling, then we had the revival. So now Codefest was on, we were ready to roll, we had our idea, and now these guys here, the ones that actually delivered, they're going to tell you what we did, why we did it, and how we did it, and at the end, where we ended up. So at this point, I believe, Jacob, give us a shot.
So the problem we decided to address with our Codefest was something that affected all developers, so it's high impact, and that's variation between projects. As you go down the list, you know, we had 4 source code repositories, 2 CVS repositories. Some teams had started using Git, and so newer projects were created and put in GitHub, and eventually we had a stash repo created internally, and so we started using that. 5 build systems. We had a large Ant build system we called Building Blocks, and then there was another one called Building Blocks 2, which was meant to replace the original one. But you know, people weren't too excited about keeping that going, so that died out. Gradle started popping up. People started getting interested in Gradle, and there was the grassroots effort to introduce Gradle. Some projects were migrated over. We started using script plugins as a way to start sharing plugins. Maven, at one point people were interested in Maven, so some projects were created with that. And then we have Rails projects that were being deployed with Ant. 2 module repositories. We had a flat file network share, or our Ivy repo, and Artifactory. Originally, developers would download third-party dependencies and put them on the network share, so that's where all of our dependencies would be. Eventually, we introduced Artifactory and started migrating to Artifactory. A project to do that was a big influence on doing a Codefest, because during that migration, we broke every build, because eventually we couldn't deploy anything. So we had a miracle effort over the weekend to fix everything, get everything going again, and people kind of like that. Focused effort, just doing one thing that developers really enjoyed, that would make our lives a lot easier. And then configuration hierarchies. We had Maven standard and then a custom Ivy configuration that nobody really kind of understood. So it was a lot of explaining that. So, and then 2 version numbering systems. Your basic, major, minor, patch versions, and then 1 dot, and then however many builds that project had. So 1.400 or something. So a lot of different permutations, and depending on when a project was created, you didn't know what kind of permutation it was created with. So, and we have a shared code base at CARFAX, to where if a team needs to get something done with a project, they can just go in and make those changes. So going in, getting a project, not having it build, trying to figure out what's going on was a big drain. And on top of that, we had manual steps to getting a project out. So Run our tests, of course, manually bump the version, commit that, tag it as that version number, and then we're ready to deploy. So some manual steps, some developer boilerplate steps, that if we messed it up, then that was just more time wasted. And if we're updating jar 3, then have to do that 3 times. And we could fail at any time. So we wanted to streamline that process. We didn't want to think about it. We just wanted to deploy and get things out. So, the goals for Codefest, we limited the scope to jars, just projects that other projects depended on. And we wanted to consolidate all this and just have one way to do it. So that if people need to make changes to library jars, no surprises. They know where to go get it. They know that it's going to be in Stash, in our Git repository. They know it's going to publish to Artifactory. They know it's going to be built with Gradle. And they know it's going to be on a certain Jenkins server. Another thing, we had like at least 7 Jenkins servers. So, and that wasn't standardized, so you don't know where to go find that job. So understanding all of our, what different permutations that projects had was a big unknown. We didn't know what was out there. So it took a lot of preparation to get ready for Codefest, and let Paul talk a little bit about that.
So this was a developer-run project, largely. So for the managers, I guess you can kind of skip this part. For us developers, there's a lot of activities that take place preparing a project like this that we normally are not involved with. And we were kind of running them. As Jim was provisioning the support from the business, we had to provision support from our users. And that's probably not the best phrase to use. Notice how this originally started. This came as ideas from developers, so they already had a buy-in from the beginning. But and the next slide will explain this in more detail as to how we were trying to obtain that. But that is an important part, is making sure that the users supported the project. We also had to do a number of preparations that were more technical in nature. We had to research what it is that we're trying to do, and also in the following slides there'll be some more details that it's not a trivial matter to do a conversion like that, even for a reasonably small code base like ours was. There's this concept in Agile that's iteration 0, which is during that time the team gets together and kind of discovers all the unknowns for the project. So that on day 1, when the project starts, a lot of things are prepared. So the team knows how they're going to go about solving the problem. They have already conducted a number of research investigations to find out what the problem is and how to solve some of the more difficult tasks. We didn't have an iteration 0, but we still kept the concept around, which is we spend the time preparing for the project, also making sure that some of these technical issues were being addressed. So I think last but not least, there's the logistics. This is like really trivial, but if you don't get that right, then you run the risk of spending the first week of a project just making sure there's enough computers for everybody, that there's a room for everybody to meet, that there's a servers to set up the test environment on. The infrastructure, as we found out, requires a lot of lead time, and so the sooner they know, the more they're going to help. So on the next slide, I discuss a little bit more about treating developers as users. That's not the most common paradigm we have, and for the build, that's exactly what they are. So they deserve all the attention and respect that we give to the users. And traditionally, our projects at least have been kind of, we came up with this great idea, we kind of implemented it, and developers were kind of left to themselves to learn and kind of adopt it. And the developers follow the same curve, adoption curve, as every other group. You'll have people who are enthusiastic about the new things, but you also have people who just want to get their work done, and they don't particularly care for some breaking changes to their build system. So we did a certain number of activities to make sure that they had the buy-in and that they were prepared for what was coming. There is a lot of, you see a picture here from one of the sessions. In all the public meetings that the department could have, we could pretty much describe what it is that we're going after and prepare everybody for the upcoming changes. We wouldn't stop there. We also conducted training. There's, for Git, there's a high point of entry. And for Gradle, there isn't such a high point of entry, but it is a different build system. So we used, at CARFAX, we have a mentoring program, which is kind of a developer grassroots effort where fellow developers kind of conduct training sessions for other developers. So we used that program, utilized it to conduct a number of training sessions. By the time we were ready to start, pretty much everybody in the department had at least one training session on Git. The future to be team had a lot of Gradle training sessions from Jacob, our Gradle expert. This is kind of looking forward, but to maintain the support, we continued by making sure that the development, wider development team, the department was involved and knew what was going on. So halfway through the project, we conducted a demo. We didn't have everything ready by that time at all, but we could at least show it to the developers and get their feedback. We conducted another demo at the end of the project to show them what they paid for, basically, what they had coming. And if, in case anybody missed all that, we also left documentation behind. So anybody pulling out the new project could find out, oh, it's been moved. Oh, this is how we build it. This is where it's at. This is how we bring it into your new project. And now, time for something different. I would like to change gears for a second and talk a little bit about more of the technical aspects of the research that we were doing. So I kind of started out not really knowing what we have. We have had about 20 years of development at CARFAX, probably about 15 years of Java, different teams, different people. As you have seen, 4 source code repositories, so it wasn't even a single repository where all the code was. And not a single person had a picture of all the code and its relationships. So we had to kind of take a step back and go back to the CARFAX code mines and build ourselves some tools that would allow us to discover what we had in there. And this title, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but I think this was introduced by Dave Thomas in his podcast for Software Engineering Radio. And if you haven't listened to that podcast, it's a great kind of inspiring talk, which basically says when you're treating a large chunk of code and you're trying to learn it, you have to treat it a little differently than by opening it in the IDE and just kind of clicking through and trying to understand what's going on. You will probably never get the full picture, or at least won't get it quickly. So you have to build a different set of tools, and we did build them. Essentially got all the code in one place, put some tools together to try and mine the dependencies, and this is what we got. So faced with something like this, well, how would you try and convert this in a way that wouldn't take every build down and wouldn't result in the same thing that we had in the previous project? That might be a little difficult.
So what does this represent? Is this just the dependencies?
These are, yes, every node here is a jar. And the edges, and you don't see the arrows because everything is so small, but that points, the edge here is a dependency from one jar to another.
Are these all jars that you can build in-house, or are they just from any?
These are all these are just the in-house. Yes. So there's about 250 jars in here on this picture. And once again, we were not making any presumptions about this. The way we defined the jar was simply if it's referenced somewhere else in a dependency file, it's a jar. Which turned out to be that we had some
And by the way,
applications
thank
that
you
were jars.
for the first question. And the CARFAX bobblehead.
Thanks.
So are there any more questions explaining what this picture represents?
Explain a little bit about the tools or the scripting or something that you use. Like, what were your dependencies definitions before, and how do you mind? Like, I'd be interested in learning more about that or understanding that.
So 2 slides ago, we introduced, like, we had 4 build systems.
Yeah.
Actually, probably there were even more variations there. We just identified 4 major ones. The tools were fairly primitive. What was important with those tools would be that we wouldn't necessarily trust them right away. So the tools were simply a parsing of the dependency files and building this graph. And then what we did was we wouldn't trust the first few attempts at parsing. We'd just kind of manually check it and kind of see, does this make sense? So you're certainly missing things out. You're missing things if it's commented out. We've run into problems where the module name was not matching by case, or where module name would be different than the name of the project in the repository. And these are all edge cases, as it turns out. But you would still not trust your tool initially. You just kind of see what it gives you and then kind of spot check it. So there's nothing fancy there, but you have to start somewhere. And especially with a wide variety of building systems that are involved, there'd probably be no single tool that would do it for you. There's 2 parts to your question. I think I only answered one half of it.
Well, I guess, like, what were the dependencies? Like, I guess, what did you use before? Was it Ivy or something?
So we did have Ivy. That was one thing. There was one of the builds actually had dependencies specified in the end files themselves. There was Gradle. This is the the early adopter Gradle. This is not the Gradle that we ended up with. There was anybody else help me? I think that's about it. Right, Gantt and Grails too. So there's also the Grails builds. So they kind of look like Gradle, or at least early Gradle, but they're not. So all that, once again, the tools are far from perfect, but as it turns out, they were good enough for this data set. And this gave us a picture of what we had ahead of us. So this is kind of daunting and overwhelming, especially if some of your initial goals of the project are not to break anybody, to gradually deliver on the investment. That might be difficult when you have something like this, and it's also possible that your world will be even more complicated. This is just 250 jars. So let's see how we could possibly tackle a problem like this. Here's a simpler representation that we can use as an example of how to maybe try and do a conversion that doesn't break anything. Now, I wanted to poll the audience. In your world, do you work with versioned dependency systems where you have applications and then jars that are shared across the applications and the jars are versioned? How many people have that in their life? Okay. So for those of you who have that, then this will be familiar and applicable. Those of you who don't, maybe you can ask questions and we'll see if anything like that applies in your world. So this is a simplified version. This assumes that there's no version discrepancies here in the dependency graph. What I mean by that is jar 4 could depend on some version of jar 2, and jar 3 could depend on a different version of jar 2. And if you went into the dependency resolution talks, they spent quite a bit of time explaining how conflict resolution is done in those cases. Okay, so I wanted to start with a naive conversion that would just start with converting jar 4 to the new build system. And hopefully at the end of this example you will see that it matters how you pick up what order you do your conversions in. So if I were to convert jar 4 to the new build system, I still have jar 3 building with the old build system, and I have jar 2 building with the old build system. So first thing I have to do is I have to let the old build system know how to pull dependencies from the new build system. At the same time, this is still built with the old build system, so now the new build also needs to know about how to get dependencies from the old build. That's kind of a two-way communication that is implied here. Now, what happens next after I convert jar 2 to the new build system? I have to come back and then update the dependency in jar 4 on jar 2. So I have to rebuild jar 4, even though technically I have no work to do there. I have to come back and rebuild it. So these are the two concerns we have when we just do a naive sort of conversion from any spot in the graph. Okay, so maybe there is some easier way to do it, or maybe there is a way that might minimize some of these problems. And let's take a look at a solution. So this is not a hard mathematical proof that this is an optimal way, but it's certainly one way that is reasonably safe to do the conversions. We simplify the dependency graph by assigning levels to jars. And we start at the bottom. At the bottom are the things that do not depend on anything, at least within our CARFAX ecosystem. They might have external dependencies, but we're not concerned with those. So these are level 1 jars. And then level 2 are things that just depend on level 1s. And then level 3s, this is a little tricky here. Level 3s are things that depend on at least one level 2. Okay, so this kind of builds a leveled hierarchy. And then we claim that it's safe to convert all level 1s first, then convert level 2s, level 3s. What you get with a system like that is you get, first of all, the minimal number of rebuilds. And the second thing you get is that your new build does not have to know anything about your old build. So if you don't think that that's a big deal, the bidirectional communication is always much more complex than just a single direction. So just to summarize, we would do jar 1, jar 2, jar 4, jar 3, and then we would be done. So the first homework assignment is to do...
But you had to change the level 2, or the level... You started with level 1, right? And then you had to change the level 2 build scripts. So did you do the level 1 new build in a way that the output was the same than with the end builds, so the level 2 builds just could pick it up like they always did pick it up?
So yes, so first of all, the old build had to understand the new build and how to pull it out from there. So
Okay.
so that we could not help. There's always, with a gradual conversion, there's always either the new build has to know about the old build, or the old build has to know about the new build.
What you could have theoretically done to say, okay, the new build will provision the output like the old build initially, but you will kind of parameterize that, and then you would go up all the levels, and then when everything is migrated, you could switch the parameter and say now put it there.
That is certainly possible.
Then you wouldn't
yes.
have to touch the old builds. Possibly, just an
Yes,
idea.
in our case, and I think I agree that this is a good approach. In our case, remember we had to deal with different build configurations, so that would have made it complicated and difficult to do things this way, because we would essentially have the new build would still have to kind of know how to produce things for the old build. But certainly that would be probably a viable approach in an environment that wasn't as complex as ours already was.
Now, as you start at the bottom of this thing, the leaves, as you build jar 2 and jar 1, all of those other things don't necessarily need to be rebuilt because you still have them pointing to the old system. You only change them to the new stuff as you walked up the levels?
Correct. There's one more concern that I didn't mention, but let's say that you have a new feature that needs to go in. And that feature is already in one of the converted jars. So now you need to build your application and include the new jar 2 into the build. So at that stage, you would need to go through and update, say, dependency of jar 2, somewhere else in jar 4, and then bring that in out of the application tree. But you should still be able to build because your old build knows about your new build. But yes, the new versions as they get built, they're kind of not part of the ecosystem yet until you need them. Until you walk up and convert something like a jar 4, the new jar 2 is not being referenced anywhere unless you need something that's in it.
And then at the same time, or when you update jar 4, you don't have to worry about updating jar 2 to go to jar 3, point to jar 2 until it's time to convert.
Until it's time to convert it, yes. So
what? And the only reason that you had to have the old system know about the new one was to make sure you could patch if something needed to be pushed.
Yeah. So let's say we're in the middle of our Codefest activities, and we're halfway through the conversion, and somebody decides, oh, I got this emergency change that has to go out, and now we'd have to scramble and figure out how to allow their code change to go out, and we would either have to throw our code away, our conversions away, because they'd say they made that change down here somewhere, and essentially we had to reconvert everything because their new code change was kind of had to be brought into the new build system. Or alternately, they would have to wait until we're done with their application tree. So that was one concern, was not to kind of follow the path we had before, which is don't convert under pressure.
We talked about all of this at length in that pre-planning phase, just constantly back and forth about different situations that could arise. So that's why it's really valuable to have some light lead in at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you might arrive, with Hans's ideas, you might arrive at different conversion plan. I think it's so long as you have a plan for emergencies, you'd probably be in good shape. You're not flying blind at least. There will, and I'll discuss that there's at least one issue potential with this that we would have to face. Fortunately, we didn't face it, but we at least knew it could have come. Are there any more questions? Okay, so back to the homework assignment. This will be quick. Okay. So the homework assignment was to normalize that other graph, and this is the normalized version of it. It might not look much simpler, but this time the levels mean something in here. Previously, the levels were just assigned by the graphing software just to make this look reasonable. This time, the development team can kind of go in and start converting the jars from the bottom. As soon as they're done with the last jar of level 1, they can go up start converting level 2. And that assures that they can, this is their battle plan. They can follow it and not break anything. We did remove a few edges there for the purpose. In the previous graph, you saw they were redundant because they were also brought in transiently or transitively, depending on the definition of that you go with. So we did remove a few edges, but it doesn't seem like that simplified it. What this does though is it orders the jars in a certain way that now allows us to do the conversions. So to summarize, here are the few things we wanted to get from this strategy: is make sure that we can always ship, we minimize the rebuilds. We can work in parallel with minimal coordination. That's also perhaps a benefit. You don't need to kind of coordinate who's converting what application tree, what is the next step. You know that all level 1s can be picked up at any point by anybody, and they're not going to break anything so long as the team is on converting level 1. One more thing is that you get from this is that you don't get any surprises. If you bring in a dependency that has been converted, it's not bringing in anything from the old build with it. So that is useful when you're debugging things. Our hierarchy, if I can go back here. Our hierarchy had 9 levels on it. So if you're here and you're building something, and something comes here with from some old build, you might have a hard time trying to debug that. So one thing that we cannot guarantee is in this emergency situation when we're trying to ship something and we're mixing the builds, we cannot guarantee that something will not come in and the dependency resolution won't be able to make sense out of it. We were in the extreme situation where we even had different group IDs for the same jars in our world. So it's possible that the dependency resolution would not be able to fix that. We knew that it was a possibility, and we had our eyes open for it, and we got lucky, so we didn't have any issues with it. And now that we had a battle plan, we were ready to start executing. And Jacob has...
I'll start. I'll talk a little bit about kind of the process we took to execute Codefest. One thing that people was worried about was during Codefest, since we only have 2 weeks to get this done in, it's going to be a pretty intense project, and we didn't want distractions. Emails come in all the time to say, "Oh, can you check into this? Can you look into this?" And it's kind of distracting to the team. So Jim told us from the start, "Don't check your email. You're solely on this project. If it's a serious enough fire, we'll get you, but don't worry about anybody else." And like Jim mentioned, there was half the team was brought on about 2 weeks beforehand. So that was a big reason why we didn't want to spend a lot of time beforehand working out process and how we work together as a team. At CARFAX, we're pretty good at working with constantly changing requirements, so we're pretty used to that. We enjoy that. So we started off with a half-day kickoff just to talk about the problem, kind of discuss what Paul just went over, what our game plan was. We had a tool that Jason developed to kind of show us dependency graphs for each project. We could visualize those, we worked in daily iterations and with daily retrospectives. It was constant feedback loops. In the morning, we're discussing about what we want to get done that day. At lunch, we're talking about what we had gotten done. Going into the project, we had no idea what we were going to build, Gradle-wise. We knew we kind of wanted to improve the workflow, but we didn't know how to do that at all. So that was something we knew that was going to evolve as we went. And a very important piece of that was we knew we were going to have an expert on the team. So we contacted Gradleware, and Luke Daley came and helped us out for the first week. Just we didn't know Gradle, how to deploy Gradle to an enterprise level, so we brought Luke in to help us do that. So.
Right. Yeah. So I came into the project knowing nowhere near as much as what you now know about it. We'd had some kickoff talk beforehand, and I knew at a high level what was going on in the scope of the project, and I was immediately quite enthusiastic about it and felt good about our chances of success. And there was some serious thought had gone into the process. This whole idea of trying to structure the migration path to be as least disruptive as possible and trying to map it out, and this idea that this was something that needed such an effort. There was a clear understanding of the potential benefits of going into this. And I was a great bunch of guys to work with, immediately felt completely part of the team, and not so much responsible for driving the entire process. It was very much a CARFAX driven thing. I was there to contribute on specifics of technical points about Gradle and provide hopefully insights and help to decisions along the way. But really the whole thing was driven from CARFAX. And I think that's what made the project successful and continued to be a success. It meant that when I left, the project carried on, and I think carried on in a really strong way. And I getting to work firsthand with everybody there. And as Jacob said, there wasn't really a lot of Gradle expertise in-house at the start. But in 1 week, through pairing and working with everybody, at the end there's a custom Gradle workflow in place and a real path forward that had improved on the previous build infrastructure. So it was the way the project worked from my perspective, and the way it was integrated into the team, it just couldn't have been any better. It was a great way to do it.
Yeah, it was fun having Luke on the team, and it was fun just having Luke as a team member and being able to pair in with him. All the work that we do, we pair in at CARFAX, so we pair programming all the time. So that's what we're used to. So like we said at the beginning of the day, we'd choose what we'd work on, and then Luke would just pick up his piece of it, and we'd work on it with him. And so that was key to, once Luke left, we had the skills to keep the project going. Because once Codefest was over, we knew there's still a ton of work to be done in that area. And so Hans touched upon this last night at the keynote of Gradleware's intention is to give us those skills so that we're not dependent. We can do that work ourselves. So a lot of time was spent in the project sharpening the axe, preparing for conversions. About 7.5 days of the 10-day project was spent was preparing. So just that last remainder was spent actually converting projects. So we spent a lot of time automating conversions, spent a lot of time developing plugins, defining workflows, things like that. So automating the conversion meant using CVS to Git to move all our projects from CVS to Git. Our Gradle conversion script, we'd started off before the project with kind of a basic one to restructure the projects to a Gradle convention, but we beefed it up throughout the project and iterated on it through the whole project. We knew that we wouldn't get it all perfect and then convert every project. So we were improving that throughout the project, and we built in QA checks. So after converting, we would build it with the old way, build it with the new way, and make sure that they were equivalent. That helped us find a lot of gotchas, differences that we hadn't accounted for. And also, if we were converting projects on level 2 and we hadn't got all level 1s, we check that and say, oh, we didn't convert all. You have a dependency that hadn't been, or a project that hadn't been converted yet. So go back and change that. So that helped out a lot. And if we were lucky enough that everything went smooth, we saw a success kitty at the end. So everybody got a kick out of that. So another important part of the project was just having a test environment, having a sandboxed Artifactory, Jenkins, and Stash, so that we didn't break anybody else. We could experiment, we could try different things, blow it away if we needed to, and nobody was affected. And the Gradle infrastructure that we were left with, we felt really happy with. We felt that it was solid. Builds were reproducible. We got the benefits that we knew that we could have with Gradle. Everything was testable, everything was versioned. People weren't scared to go in and work on the build system anymore. Beforehand with the Ant, of course, there's 2 people maybe in the company that know about that build, and the way we had it set up, if you push out something, you break everybody. So we really got the benefits of Gradle in a short period of time. So let Jason talk about, go over some of the plugins that we created with the project and how those helped us.
So I get to talk about some of the more fun things that we did with the plugins. The first thing, you notice that we got quite a few up here. Not as many artifacts as LinkedIn has there, but we're getting up there. One of the neat things about it was people started adding to this list almost immediately after we rolled it out. Like Jacob was alluding to, they were no longer afraid to expand the functionality of the system they're using. And that brings up a really neat point that, Gradle puts the power in the developer's hand. You no longer need that build expert to kind of do this stuff for you. Why didn't we do one gigantic plugin and call it the CARFAX plugin and roll everything into that? Well, that's just bad object-oriented programming, and we got some good advice from Luke here saying that you want to make modular small components that have a single responsibility. And so some of these, like Java 5 compatibility plugin or something, is like 4 lines long. But you know what it does, and you can bring it in when you need it. And then we have a wrapper plugin that wraps up a few of these, and we can just throw that on something when we want to do that. So some of the highlights here. And now that you've been going to all your technical talks, everybody knows how to do all this stuff. And if you don't, go ask these guys. Or you can come, talk to us if you want specific details. But with the version plugin, for example, we made the version designation that you find in the Gradle properties file interpreted as an object within the build system. And this was a really great suggestion from Luke. I think I was sitting there one day starting to write the code to do the verification on build numbers or something that I was going to throw in some other plugin. And it seems so obvious after it gets pointed out to you, just make it an object, right? Then you can control that it's validated the same way across your whole system, that when you print it out, it's always the same, that it meets these requirements. And we built in a couple nice little utilities here, like making the snapshot Boolean, and gave it some functionality to bump the snapshot version, bump the version number, things like that, just so we can consolidate on how that's done. The Dependencies Plugin, this is kind of a plugin and an extension. We moved all of our internal CARFAX dependencies into a separate properties file, where we set the version number for that dependency within that separate properties file. And you may go, well, why would you want to do that? The idea here was moving closer to true continuous integration. If you went to Hans's talk yesterday on large Gradle for large stacks, right? We're kind of in one of those not so good patterns of the branching thing. We set our versions and then they kind of sit there until someone goes to mess with it. But this gives us the ability to have tasks within Gradle that'll go through there and figure out what the latest version is and change it programmatically for us. And we're hoping in the future to work on this system some more to control that through our CI server or some other means. It had some other kind of neat functionality in this plugin. A lot of our developers use Eclipse, so this would go through and look at those internal dependencies and see if you had a project in your workspace that has the same name as that. And if it does, it would use the Eclipse plugin or the Eclipse API within Gradle to add project dependencies to your Eclipse project file. So that means that if I have a bunch of interrelated projects, I don't have to actually roll them all up into jars to get the code between them. As long as they're all in the workspace, any code changes I make with any project there will be seen in the other projects immediately without having to compile. All right. The release plugin. This is kind of a take on the Maven release plugin with a little bit of extra functionality. I thought it was funny that these guys were saying, "Oh, that plugin's a little overrated in Maven." Well, we pretty much implemented that and some more in about a day and a half. So I could believe that. It's got some fail-safes in there. It's got pretty tight coupling with Git. Fail-safes in there to make sure you've committed your code. It does a pull as part of this for you. So if there's merge conflicts, it'll handle them automatically without you having to. If it can, if it can't, then well, it's your responsibility anyways before you do a release to merge yourself with the master branch. Obviously runs the testing. Make sure that you don't have any snapshot version dependencies. It handles all of the version number semantics for you through that object. So, if your interns can't count, not a problem anymore. It will tag for you. It even kicks off the Jenkins job that performs the final release and opens up the browser for you to look at the console output. So it pretty much does all that and a bag of chips. And if something's wrong, it shows you this little ASCII stop sign, which we like our ASCII art. The publish plugin, like I said, we started out with jars, but it pretty quickly evolved after we released it to our other devs to handling some application deploys and Red Hat packages. And the publish plugin here handles getting these things out to where they can be consumed by other people. And it's smart enough to look at whether or not this is a snapshot or what kind of artifact this is and put it in the proper repository after that. And that's just a general overview of some of the more interesting things we did. None of this is really that hard to implement. Like we had all of this going in a week, given the little help from the right people and some motivated devs, maybe a couple more Gradle Summit classes. And you guys will figure all this out on your own. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sam to talk about what happened after we were done.
So as we were going through this process, we've got this code base that, we don't understand everything in it. So we found a few surprises. Probably one of the first surprises, which was really good for our scope, was that out of about 250 jar dependencies, we were only really about 166 were in scope. Of those that were out of scope, they were either dead code that we had no idea that it was dead code, so it was just laying around, or it belonged to another team. And so it wasn't part of our responsibility to convert it over. And we also had a few oddities with the builds between, we had our version checker between the jars. Well, we found a few things, like we needed to do some jiggling on some of the jars to get our tag libs to work right. We had one class where we had a dependency on a proprietary third-party RPM or jar file, and that jar file, for some reason in the Gradle build, the mocking stopped working for it. So after messing with that for a while, we switched the mocking framework on that class that we were testing with, and the test started passing. And I guess we got a little overambitious, and in one case we converted another team's jar, which actually turned out not to be a problem since we were doing all of this in our test environment. We could just roll that back, and it all went pretty smooth. But it's kind of interesting when you go through this process of analyzing your code and going through it, you learn stuff about your code that you really didn't know. Let's see. So we also learned some lessons from this, and one of the most important lessons was to get the product owner support early on and get their buy-in for it, so they understand what's going on and they know why this team of developers is off doing something else and not delivering what they would directly see as value, because we've communicated to them that this does have value when you look at it, and it's going to help us go faster in the future to deliver things that provide direct value to our customers. And one thing we thought that we would be able to do was, within the first couple of days, we thought we'd be able to take our build script and start converting projects. But it turned out that that wasn't really the case, and it's a good thing too. So, as we mentioned earlier, it was 7.5 days into the project before we actually had enough of a pipeline that we felt confident for starting to actually do the production conversions outside of our test system. And so that was good, because we didn't have a case where we had done some jars and converted them and put them in our production system, but we may not have had the automated part to do the CI yet. So once we got that build pipeline done, we were just able to crank through jar by jar and handle problems as they arose. And it wasn't a perfect process, and we made some mistakes, but none of them were deal breakers, and we just moved on from that. And so follow through, after Codefest, we spent a long weekend, the developers that wanted to stay, and converted the rest of the projects, or most of the rest of the projects. We still had 28 projects left over, which we converted in the remaining 3 weeks. We created a group of developers that was focused on the plugins and the Gradle build, and kind of being stewards over that process, and making sure that as we continue building and growing our Gradle infrastructure, that it happens in a managed way, that we have a release plan, and know what features are going into it and when they're going into it. And we also started creating new plugins, as it was mentioned earlier, almost right off the bat. Other developers started picking this up and creating new plugins. Other development teams started picking it up and using this in their department. So it really just kind of took a life of its own and gained a lot of momentum. So now that Codefest is over, let me go back to that slide for a second. Let's see. So you notice here we have our dashboard.
High-tech dashboard.
Yeah, our high-tech dashboard of our current conversions, and This was the final version of the dashboard. So once we were done with Codefest, we still have a lot of work to do. We're converting to a new data center, and Gradle is going to be a central part of that. So we're really, that was just kind of getting started with Gradle, and we've got a lot of work to do going forward. Our product owner and investors, they saw the project as a huge success, and as a result of that, we already have business buy-in to start our next Codefest, and we're trying to figure out what that's going to be.
So in summary, it takes a whole team to do this, and that's one of the principles of Agile and XP is whole team. You've got to have the people, they've got to be passionate about it, they've got to be supported, you've got to have different types of people on this. You've got to have the leaders supporting it from one end as well as the developers in parallel taking it down the path together. You've got to be able to gather that intelligence so that when you do the Codefest, you're ready to go. So that you don't just walk in and spend half your Codefest, if not more, trying to figure it out as you go and not really coming up with that great solution at the end. And you've got to be able to execute and really focus on that execution. And finally, you've got to have a great tool, and that's where Gradle came in for us. Great tool came in and helped us achieve all of our results. And then all through all of this, you've got to have an open, honest discussion environment where people can come in with new ideas, challenge what you're thinking about, and in an environment that it's all part of that process of sharing and growing together versus challenging things. So in the end of it, then we find that we have our success kitty, and we had a great success when we ended up with this. So, any questions?
Jim, I'd just like to...
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I think it's worth pointing out that the sophistication of the automated conversion process. To me, that was one of the real highlights of the project, is really constantly pushing to automate the project. And you alluded to the fact that 7.5 days just working on that and then really putting it into practice. But this was dealing with grabbing projects from different version repositories, potentially different formats, analyzing them, pushing them into a new version repository, converting them into a Gradle build that was preceded with the build framework that you created with the plugins, etc., automatically creating Jenkins jobs for those projects, pushing that through to Artifactory, testing it got there, building it with the old build system, building it with the new build system, comparing that they're exactly the same. And if all that goes smoothly and you've tested all that, then that's a high assurance that things are converted safely. So having that infrastructure in place at the end of those days allowed these guys to just crank through the conversions with a really high level of assurance that it worked. I think that the iterative process of doing that and constantly looking for more to automate, I think was just a really great way to go through that. And with regards to, it's exactly what I love to see about people adopting Gradle, the fact that you saw all those plugins, all those things that were manual tasks or things that developers wanted automated as part of the process, they're now empowered to do so. So literally 1 or 2 pairing sessions with a few of these guys, I would come back a day later and have a look at the work that had happened in the plugins, all these new automations and new things, a whole workflow designed the way they wanted to release software. They've gone from not writing a Gradle plugin to really implementing the way they wanted the build to work. I think is a huge, huge success. And it was testable, managed, all the great things, the way I like to see Gradle being used. And after that, more and more developers coming in and fixing their own problems. And it's great to hear that you formed a kind of committee around that, people to manage it and really do that properly. So I think it's just it's a great story of Gradle adoption, very well thought out. The project just had ticked all the right boxes for me. It was run so well, and yeah, I think it's a really great story and a model for how to take on this kind of migration.
Yeah, I would like to share one story when we first got in contact, and it was about scheduling Luke's engagement. There were a few surprises for us. First it was like, oh yeah, the engagement starts on a Sunday. Oh, it was the first company that ever asked us, hey, we start on a Sunday. And then I think when we called, it was the week where there was a Good Friday.
Right.
And then we said, oh, maybe they might have missed it. So we had a chat. I said, you're aware that there is Good Friday in this week? And then you said something, the sentence I will never forget. Well, we call it a Good Friday when we make good progress with our build. Okay, I will not forget that sentence. So, and I think, imagine what you have achieved in 2 weeks, you know, because enormous passion, enormous dedication, and you were willing to take on the full responsibility for that. I can just contrast that with an engagement with a client we had not so long ago, also 10 days engagement, right? And they would say, oh, we want to achieve so much in that time. And then one of our really good guys were there, and then they had no time at all. No real buy-in. Management did not set the people free. So after 1 week, I got an emergency call, we didn't make good progress, and then I talked with our guys and said, well, they were not available to answer any questions. How can you make progress? So you have to invest, and you have to, as a company, and you can't just, you know, just have to wish to be successful without investing and saying, hey, during that time we can't have any other responsibilities. And
yeah, and there was a real energy and passion going in, and a certain fearlessness in that we'll do whatever it takes to get through it, and constantly reevaluating, iterating through it. I think is another key aspect to the success. Yeah. It doesn't mean Gradle's just a tool. At the end of the day, you need the team and the people and the culture to make it work. That's exactly what happened here.
And one thing would also like to add, you know, you mentioned that we came in a half day on that Sunday, and that some of us stayed to work a long weekend. But during that Codefest week, you know, we were working 8-hour days. So we weren't staying 12, 13 hours to get this done.
Well, we were following our XP and
Right.
our Agile practices, pair programming with dedicated sessions with breaks. I mean, we didn't change our principles and our practices other than, as Jacob presented to you guys, we amped it up. And so we did an iteration a day versus an iteration a week or an iteration 2 weeks, so that we could get the benefit of that in that short amount of time. Other comments or questions? All right, guys, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.